Hey everybody, welcome back to the SuperBake podcast. I'm your host, Baker. Let's talk about stuff. Okay. This is going to be one of those rare reviews where you're going to hear me badmouth a movie pretty bad. I said last time that I was going to try to do my review for the new Exorcist Believer movie. I got to see that earlier today, so yeah, I don't need time to put my thoughts together. I feel like I can articulate everything I'm going to say about this movie right now. This is going to be another off-the-cuff review, but I don't really think that there needs to be... I don't think I need to plan this out too much. I did not like this movie. I would even go so far as to say I think this is a bad movie. I feel like I'm usually pretty fair with my reviews. Like, I feel like, anyone who listens to my podcast in the past, any of my previous reviews, I feel like I generally try to give movies the benefit of the doubt. Like I know that I was kind of hard on the newer Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but I feel like for the most part I'm pretty generous. But man, I did not like this movie. Like, I don't think it's the worst thing ever, but I don't think it's good. And as somebody who's a pretty big fan of the original Exorcist film, like I love the first Exorcist and I love Exorcist 3. I have not seen Exorcist 2, although I've heard it is horrible. I've heard it's generally considered like one of the worst movies ever made. So I can't compare it to this one because I've never seen it, but this movie was very disappointing to me in many ways, and I'll get into kind of the reasons why I think that, but first, let's get into the plot. So, in theory, this movie is supposed to be a sequel to the original Exorcist film. It's basically supposed to be to the original Exorcist what Halloween 2018 was to the first Halloween movie from the 70s. But there really isn't much connecting this movie to the original Exorcist film, with the exception of Ellen Burstyn. And before I go any further, of course, spoiler alert, I assume you probably knew that coming into this, but just in case. But yeah, there's not much connective tissue between this and the original Exorcist film, with the exception of Ellen Burstyn. She is in this movie. If you've seen her in the trailer, then you kind of already know, although she's not in much of the movie, which I wasn't surprised about. I had seen some reviews for this movie already going into it, so I kind of had an idea of like what the general consensus was. I knew that it wasn't good. I don't think it would have made any difference. I think even if I'd gone into this movie completely blind, it wouldn't have affected my opinion of it. But anyways, yes. It's supposed to act as a sequel to the original Exorcist film. The movie takes place, I think, in Georgia. In this movie, it's from the perspective of two different families instead of one. Their daughters, named Catherine and Angela, both get possessed by apparently the same demonic presence. The families try to put together a sort of exorcism that combines practices from all different kinds of religions in the hopes to save their daughters' souls and exorcise the demons out of them. One thing this movie does, like I'll kind of go over like some of the things about it that I liked first. I think I tend to do that quite a bit, and the stuff that I liked about it is going to be a much shorter list than the stuff that I didn't like. The stuff that I did like was I actually kind of liked the beginning of the movie, where we spend more time with, I think his name's Leslie Odom's character, Victor, I think is the name of his character in the movie. We spend more time with him, and we get his backstory in the movie, because him and his daughter Angela, Victor and Angela, really are kind of the main, I would argue they're kind of the main characters of the movie, and then the other girl, Catherine, and her family are kind of like they're kind of more like the secondary characters in a way. But I did like that the movie went into Victor's background a little bit more. There's a nice callback to the original Exorcist film with the two dogs fighting. So that was a nice little callback to the original film. Felt a little on the nose, considering that's, like, I think the very first frame that you see in the movie. It's the very first thing that you see. So felt a little obvious to me. But anyways... yeah, we get to see his background, him and his wife getting blessed, because his wife is pregnant, and then there's the tragic earthquake where his wife gets killed in the ensuing earthquake, and then he's left to raise his daughter Angela on his own. So there is that emotional core between those two characters, which I think the intention is that's supposed to form kind of the bedrock of the movie, the emotional bedrock of the story. It kind of works, but we don't really get a lot of time with these characters. We don't really get much time to really see them together. Like we get like one real scene between Victor and his daughter, which is a nice charming scene where we see them kind of messing around in the house. She steals a piece of sausage from him that he's trying to eat. We get a glimpse of like what their relationship is like, but we don't get a whole lot. And that's kind of one problem with this movie that I have. I don't want to get too far into it. I'll kind of talk about that later, but I'm going to, save that for later. But that's kind of part of one of the main problems I have with this film. Another thing that I liked about it, though, was the two girls in the movie, Angela and Catherine. They're both really good. Both actresses do a really good job, very similar to Linda Blair from the first film. They're genuinely creepy when they get possessed. They give pretty gripping performances. Actresses' names are Olivia O'Neill, who plays Catherine, and Lydia Jewett, who plays Angela. And even before they become possessed, they do, I think, play the role of just two normal, I think they're supposed to be middle school girls, pretty well. And they're genuinely creepy and unnerving in the movie. I don't think they're given quite as much screen time as we got with Linda Blair's character in the first movie, so I think that kind of also works to the movie's detriment as well. And just like I said, we don't really get to see a lot of interaction between them and their families prior to their possessions, so I think that kind of hurts the movie too, but I'll kind of go into that a little bit later. But I think they do a good job with their respective roles. That one actress who was in, I recognized her from The Handmaid's Tale. What was her name? Ann Dowd. She's in here as Victor's next door neighbor. I thought she was really good. I thought her performance was really nice. She's like this nurse, and at first she kind of comes off as kind of this bitchy, nosy next door neighbor, but there's actually a lot more to her than that. We learn more about her background, like her religious beliefs. And when she tries to step in and help the family out. So I thought her whole element of the movie was very good. I liked that part of the film too. Honestly, I felt like the strongest part of the movie was definitely probably the first third or so, when it focuses more on when the two girls go missing, like when they leave school and they walk into the woods and they're gone for, I think it's like 3 days or something, where they go to perform this seance so Angela can speak to her dead mother. Like that stuff was cool. That was creepy. And I think when the movie focused more on that, I think it worked. It wasn't great or anything like that, but it was probably the stronger part of the movie. As the story went on, I felt like it really started to lose its footing, and especially by like the third, probably like the last third of the film, I was just completely checked out. I just didn't care anymore what was going on. Another thing that I liked about this movie is, as far as like the actual supernatural stuff, it is creepy. There's definitely like some creepy images of throughout the film. Like there's little glimpses of the, of the demonic possession that's going on. You get little hints of that throughout the film, little hints of the demon that's actually possessing the two girls. There's one scene where Angela's talking to her father. He's in her room by her bedside, and it's kind of one of those, I wouldn't say it's easy to miss, because they play some creepy music when it happens, but in the background you can actually see like this creepy face. I think it's supposed to be like the demonic version of Angela standing behind her father watching her. And that was pretty cool. That was a very creepy, effective little moment. Like I said, I think it's pretty easy to catch it because they play the creepy music. I kind of think, this is kind of a nitpick of mine, I feel like that would have worked better if they hadn't played the music. Because the image is blurred enough that if you don't pay attention, you won't really see it. And I think it would have worked better if there was no music to kind of hint that it's happening. I think that's something they did a lot in the original movie, was that, yes, there was a musical score, like musical cues throughout the movie, but there's also a lot of just silent moments where you still see creepy images on the screen, and I think that almost worked more effectively. So, yeah, I mean, the supernatural stuff in the movie is pretty creepy for the most part. It doesn't always hit, and sometimes I think it's kind of weak in some scenes, but overall, I like that aspect of it. But now I'm going to talk about some of the things about the movie that I didn't like, and unfortunately this list is going to be much longer than the list of good stuff. First off, and I've got to get this out of the way now, Ellen Burstyn's character is completely wasted in this movie. She definitely seems like she's just in this for the check, and so she can leave. She is only in the movie for like maybe a grand total of 10 minutes, if that, and she really doesn't do anything. Not really. Like in this movie, her story is that after the events of the first movie, she went on and wrote a book about what happened to her daughter, and that pissed her daughter Reagan off, so the two have been the two have been estranged ever since. Like Reagan kind of disappeared and won't talk to her anymore, and so Ellen's character doesn't really know what's going on with her. And she's become somewhat of like an expert on exorcisms, I guess, even though she can't really perform any. So it's kind of weird. I think it would have looked. I think it would have worked a little bit better if she could just do exorcisms. But Ellen Burstyn, she's like in her 90s, so obviously there's probably not a whole lot she can do in this movie. But still, her performance feels very phoned in. And this isn't necessarily. I'm not saying this to say anything bad about Ellen Burstyn. I just mean like I don't think she really cared. The impression I got watching this was that she really did not give a crap about this film, and I can't say I blame her. So yeah, she gives a very phoned in performance, I guess, in my opinion. And the whole scene where she does show up, and tries to confront, Catherine, that scene is just it's so stupid to me. Like, I've already said spoiler alert, so it doesn't really matter. Catherine attacks her and stabs her in the eyes and basically blinds her. And so she has to go to the hospital, and she's basically out of the movie or she's out of the story for the rest of the movie. We get little snippets of Ellen throughout the movie, with lines and stuff like that, but she doesn't really do anything beyond that. So her whole part in this film feels very wasted, and unnecessary. And she's really the only connective tissue between this and the original Exorcist. And that's another big problem I have with this movie, is just that this really does not feel like an Exorcist film at all. If you just removed Ellen Burstyn from this movie and just called it an Exorcist film, like a different title, you could call it anything. You could say, you could say The Exorcism of Catherine and Angela or something like that, or The Exorcism of Two Girls or something. You could call it anything else, and it would make as much sense. I mean, this really could have been just another generic run-of-the-mill Exorcist movie, or exorcism movie, I should say. This does not feel like an Exorcist film. With the outside of Ellen Burstyn and the original score from the first movie and this does not feel like it has anything to do with the first film whatsoever. It feels like a shameless cash grab to me. And this is from David Gordon Green, who did do the newest Halloween film. So I don't know if I have faith in this guy making more horror films based off classic source material. So, like, I was not a huge fan. Like, I liked Halloween 2018 fine. I didn't think it was anything amazing, but I liked it. I did not like Halloween Kills, and I really did not like Halloween Ends. And this is already supposed to be part of a planned trilogy. Although the rumor is, because this movie has been performing relatively poorly, both critically and also I think in the box office, apparently Gordon Green is kind of on the fence about like what his involvement will be in the future films. And also too, I think the studio that made this, which I think this is from, is it Blumhouse? I need to double check. Yeah, Blumhouse Productions. I think there's some talks around there behind the scenes about like how they're going to handle future installments in this franchise. So I think they've already started development on them. So I don't know if that's going to change or not. I know Hollywood stops production on movies all the time, so that doesn't necessarily mean anything. But personally, I think they should just stop. This movie did not need to happen to begin with, and the fact that there's 2 more films coming out like does not give me any confidence whatsoever. But regardless, I feel like this is just called The Exorcist because it's just trying to get people who are fans of the original, or at least are familiar with it, to come see this. So that's another major problem that I have with this movie, is that this feels like an Exorcist film in name only, and that's it. So yeah, I feel like they could have called it anything and it would have worked just as fine. And the other thing too the other problem I have, and I kind of mentioned I kind of alluded to this before, was that the first third of the movie, when the girls are missing and there's kind of this, mystery of trying to figure out where they are and what's going on, was probably the best part of the movie. The last 2/3 of the film are really probably the weakest part of the film. And the sad thing too is, like, even once the exorcism actually starts around, like, the last third, I was so checked out at that point. Like when they're setting up the stuff in Victor's house and putting the symbols on the floor and bolting the chairs down and all that stuff, I was just like so checked out at that point. I remember just thinking like, man, I don't care anymore. Like, the exorcism portion of the original film was probably one of the most interesting parts of the movie. And in this one, it is, to me, I was just checked out at that point, and that's not a good sign. Like, when you're not even interested in the actual point of the film, that's not a good sign at all. And something else too that I have a problem with this movie, and I kind of touched on this before, is that we're not really given a lot of time to get to know these characters. The movie, I don't remember how long it was. It didn't feel very long. I want to say it was like maybe a little over an hour and a half, possibly. I'm gonna check the runtime. Yeah, 111 minutes. So yeah, almost an hour and a half. Not quite, but that feels about right. It didn't feel incredibly long. I guess that's another good thing about it that I'll say. It's not an overly long movie, but anyways, the Exorcist, like the parts with the characters, like in the original movie, we get more time to spend with Chris McNeil and Reagan, and that part I thought was like the best part of that movie, or well, not the best part, but I think that helps to make the scary elements of the film that much more terrifying. Is the fact that we get to see the relationship that Chris McNeil has with her daughter. We see that there's obviously this connection between them, that they get along very well, that things are kind of tense though, because we see that we get hints of like the fact that, Chris and her husband have split up, and that's been hard on Reagan, who's been trying to cope with that. The first film takes the time to really allow the audience to at least get a decent understanding of who these two characters are. And in this movie, we really don't get much. With again, outside of the beginning of the film where we see kind of the background of what happened with Victor and his wife, which was a good, strong start to the film, it's the rest of it, we don't really get a whole lot of that. Like with the girls, once they become possessed, we really only get one scene for each girl where they do something creepy. And then it immediately moves into the next phase where they start talking about exorcisms. In the original film, we're given a good chunk of the movie of Reagan slowly becoming more distant and more disturbed and behaving in very terrifying behavior that scares her mother and anyone who comes into contact her. Like there's almost like this fight where Chris McNeil has to convince the church to allow them to perform an exorcism on her. And there is some of that in Believer, but it is so rushed that it really feels like it gets to the exorcism portion kind of quickly. I remember kind of thinking like, we're already at this point? Like, I mean, I guess I was waiting for this, but it feels like there should have been more. I think there should have been maybe a few more scenes where we kind of see the girls slowly turn into their more demonic versions of themselves. We don't really get a whole lot of that in this movie, and I think that works to the movie's detriment, in my opinion. I just wasn't a fan of the pacing of this film. It really feels like, especially after the first third, like I said, where the girls go missing, it feels like the rest of the movie moves at a fairly brisk pace and doesn't really allow a lot of time for the creepy supernatural elements to set in. That's another problem that I have with this movie too, and it's something that I think it completely misses the point of the first film. The first film feels a lot more grounded and realistic than this movie does. Like, yes, you do see supernatural elements in the first movie, like when Reagan is levitating off of her bed and things like that. But there's this big question of like faith and science and belief in that movie. Whereas in this movie, I think that they really miss that. Like, yes, of course, with Victor's character, like he's not a religious person. He stops being religious after what happens to his wife. But the movie doesn't really explore that very much. Like in the first movie, it's the same thing. Like Chris McNeil's character, she's not very religious, but as the movie goes on, she finds herself becoming more of a believer because she sees more of these supernatural things happening to her daughter, things that like doctors and science and medicine cannot explain. And she exhausts like every other option that she has available to her because she's just trying to help out her child. Like there's this sense of desperation in the first movie that we don't get in this one. Like, yes, we feel for the parents because it's clear that they care about their children in the new movie, but I don't get that sense of desperation that the first one was missing. And also, too, like, this movie doesn't really do anything new. It's the same, it's the first movie, but now it's just two girls. That's the difference. And, like, I don't know, like, it doesn't do anything interesting or innovative with that. There's no... Like, I feel like there's a lot of ideas they could have had there. Like, there's a lot of creative, like, scary avenues they could have gone with that, but they don't. Instead, it feels like a much more watered-down version of the first movie, where it's like, okay, instead of one girl who's possessed, it's two girls in this one, but that doesn't really go anywhere. There's not really much of a point to that. Like, okay, is it one demon possessing them? Is it two demons? Is it several? The movie doesn't really explore that very much. There's this whole thing, like, where Chris McNeil talks about, like, using every exorcism from every religion to try to bring the girls out, and the movie kind of feeds into that a little bit, but that doesn't really it doesn't really feel like it goes very far in that direction with that idea. It feels like there's a lot of ideas in here that just don't go anywhere, or the movie doesn't do anything with them. And it sucks because the movie suffers for it. And I don't know, like, and also too, a lot of the characters in this movie do feel pretty weak as well. Like, the performances are fine. Like I said, the performances of like the two girls are fine. The actor who plays Victor, he's fine. The parents of Catherine, I wasn't a huge fan of, and I don't think it's anything necessarily against the actor or actress. I just didn't think their characters were particularly interesting. Everybody else, the side characters and stuff like that, I mean, they're fine, but none of the characters in this movie, you don't really gravitate towards them. Again, like in the first movie, you like Chris McNeil's character, you like Reagan's character, you like Lieutenant Kinderman, you like Father Karras, you know, you care about these people in this film, and you want to see what's going to happen with them. You want to see how it's going to play out. And this one, in Believer, it doesn't feel like we have that. Like, yes, there's these main characters that you understand that these are the main characters and these are who you're supposed to root for, but I found myself having a hard time really caring about any of them. So, yeah, like, I just, by the time the movie was over, it kind of felt like I was just going through the motions. I just felt like, okay, let's get this over with. I definitely found myself checking my phone quite a bit. Despite the fact this movie is not very long, I found myself checking my phone quite a bit, especially towards the end, just kind of thinking like, okay, is this over? Is this over? And for any of you out there who are fans of the original, yes, Linda Blair does show up in this movie. She does reprise her role as Reagan for about the last 10 seconds of the film. She has all of one line where she gets to see Ellen Burstyn's character again, and I wish it was a much more touching moment than it is, but just given the fact that we don't spend much time with these two characters in the movie, it feels pretty weightless to me. It definitely is supposed to be this bigger, more emotional moment, and I just feel like it is just missing any kind of emotional punch, and it's really a shame. So they brought Linda Blair in for all of 10 seconds of this film. I mean, as far as my other problems I have with the movie, I could nitpick a lot of other stuff about it, but yeah, overall, I mean, I was not a fan of this movie. I don't think I'm going to go into it too much more than that. Like, I don't want to delve too much more into this or obsess over it, but yeah, this was definitely a disappointment for me. Like I said before, the first Exorcist is on my top 10 list of, like, you know, my favorite horror films ever made, and I was already skeptical of this movie going in. I kind of had a bad feeling they were going to mess this up, and I feel like I was 100% accurate. They 100% missed the mark on this movie, at least in my opinion. I'm sure there's going to be some people who are going to defend this movie and say that it's not that bad. And yeah, I mean, it's not the worst thing ever. I certainly think that there's worse scary movies that you could be watching. But this movie, at least in my opinion, was just a monumental disappointment. I honestly can't recommend this movie. Whether or not because the way I see it is, if you're a fan of the original movie, this film feels so disconnected to it. And Ellen Burstyn's character and Linda Blair, they feel like they were just slapped in there just to get people to come see this. So I could definitely see fans of the original being irritated by that. So I can't really recommend this to, like, fans of the old movie. But even people who aren't fans of it or may not have ever even seen the Exorcist film, I feel like this is just going to be another run-of-the-mill demonic possession movie that, you know, has interesting ideas that it just doesn't do anything with. So, yeah, I mean, if I had to give this movie a letter grade, I would probably say, I don't want to give it an F because I don't think this movie is a complete and total failure. Again, like I said, I definitely think there's far worse things out there you could watch than this, but if I'm being brutally honest, I'm going to say maybe a D+. I might be nice and give it a C-, but honestly, I'm kind of leaning more towards D+ right now. Like, this does not have a recommendation from me. I would just say, just skip this movie. Like, I just think you're better off. I don't know if this means anything to anybody. The theater I was in, I was the only person in there watching this movie. Literally the only one. There was a trailer for a movie called, I think it's called Night Swim. I can't remember. It's about this pool, I guess, that has, like, these demons in it that kill people. That trailer was scarier than this entire movie. So, I'll just leave it at that. But yeah, no, very disappointed in this movie. Did not enjoy it. Don't plan on watching it again, and I absolutely do not recommend it. So there you go. If you guys liked it, I mean, feel free to comment on my YouTube channel and, you know, let me know your thoughts on that. I'm always interested to hear about it. But yeah, for my money, nope. Big, huge misfire on Hollywood's part. So next, I'd like to talk a little bit about Castlevania Nocturne, the new Netflix series. So it's supposed to work as a standalone spin-off series of the original Castlevania series. I had discussed it, I think, a little bit previously, kind of giving my general thoughts on it, but or at least announcing that I wanted to do a review of it. But now I kind of want to give like my formal thoughts on the show after having watched all 8 episodes. I've had the chance to see the entire season in its entirety. So I kind of want to talk about it, just kind of give my overall thoughts on it. This isn't going to be a super in-depth review for this. I just kind of wanted to just discuss it briefly because I really did enjoy it overall. I'll just kind of talk about the general premise of the show. It takes place during the French Revolution in 1792. I don't remember exactly how many years it is after the events of the first series, but it's supposed to be like, I think, several hundred years after the events of the first story. So it follows the young vampire hunter Richter Belmont. Of course, he's the distant relative of Trevor Belmont from the first show. And basically it's about him and his friends trying to stop a new godlike vampire messiah who basically is determined to take over the entire world and enslave the human race. That's the general consensus of the story. He meets several other characters in the story. We see his adoptive sister, Maria. There's another character named Annette who joins Richter in his fight against the vampire horde. And there's also some surprise characters that show up throughout the story as well, including an antagonistic character named Allrox that we're introduced to pretty early on in the show. So, I got the chance to sit down and watch this show. It's 8 episodes, so it's a little bit longer than, actually it's exactly twice as long as the first season of the original Netflix series. I think that one was only 4 episodes long. Overall, it's good. I think I've seen some negative criticisms over it. Some people have been calling it like kind of a hot mess, and I don't agree with that necessarily. In general, I would say I think the first series is better. I think it has better characters. I think the characters are kind of what makes the first series probably superior to this one. Like, I love the characters of Trevor, Sypha, Alucard. Those 3 characters particularly are really great. I also liked Isaac. I thought he was good. Hector was okay. The vampire sisters, including Carmilla, were interesting. And my favorite thing one of my favorite things about the first series was the relationship that we get between Dracula and his wife, Alucard's mother. That was a big part of that series that I really enjoyed. Of course, I'm going to go into spoilers with Nocturne, so just kind of a heads up on this. And that's one of the things that I feel like Nocturne kind of missed was like great characterization. None of the characters in this show are particularly bad. Richter is fine. He doesn't have the charm or charisma that Trevor does, but I think the idea is he's supposed to be younger. He's more of a greenhorn. He doesn't really, like, he's got skill. He can definitely handle himself in combat, but I think this is really before he becomes kind of, I guess, the Richter that people know from like the games, like the established vampire hunter. I think this is based off of one of the video games, Rondo of Blood, if I'm not mistaken, which I never played that. I've never played any of the Castlevania games. It's based loosely off of Rondo of Blood and its sequel, Symphony of the Night. So, and it looks like it has story elements from Harmony of Dissonance. So, not familiar with any of those. But yeah, like Richter's fine as a character. Honestly, the other characters in the show, like I like Annette's character. She's cool. Like I like her powers, but like her, Maria, none of the characters really are that interesting with the exception of maybe Allrox, who is kind of, I mean, he's definitely he's more of an antagonist in the show. They set him up as a villain in the beginning, but there's more nuance to him. Like he's definitely much more of a layered antagonist. I don't know if I would go so far as to call him an anti-hero, but we definitely see more of his character introduced as the show goes on and kind of why he hates the Belmonts. You've probably seen him in the trailer. He's the guy that basically tells Richter when he's a kid that he's going to kill him, just not today, at some point in the future. So they do a good job of establishing him as a legitimate threat. And I recognize the voice actor who played him, and I hope I'm not butchering this guy's name, but that was Zahn McClarnon, who I recognized from, I think he was in Dr. Sleep, if I'm not mistaken, with Ewan McGregor. And I don't know how I recognized his voice, but as soon as I heard him talk, I was like, I know that voice. I've heard that guy before. So, yeah, he does a great job as Allrox. I think he's fantastic as the character. Probably one of the standout characters in the show. Everyone else is just sort of okay. I think that's probably my biggest complaint with the show is just none of the characters feel particularly strong. Like they've got some good comical moments in there. There's definitely some good moments where you see the characters kind of cutting up with each other, but it's not the same as you get from like Trevor, Sypha, and Alucard from the original series. Those three I think had great chemistry together and they played off each other very nicely. But yeah, like the first Castlevania series is incredible. It's one of my favorite shows ever. Season 3 was okay. I thought that was probably the weakest of the 4 seasons. Season 4 was really good. I feel like it, captured a lot of the magic of the first two. But the first 2 seasons, 1 and 2, which really I would kind of argue are kind of just part of the same season since season 1 is so short, those are amazing. I maintain those are probably some of the best animation that we've seen out of Netflix. That big fight against Dracula at the end of season 2, oh, so badass. One thing I will say about Nocturne is that it's from the same animation studio. It's from Powerhouse Animation Studios. So it's the same people behind this one. I don't know what the budget of this show was, but the animation I would definitely say is really good. It has the same similar look as the first one, particularly the eyes. I've kind of noticed like the eye design is very, like they have a kind of a unique design on the eyes. But you can definitely tell it's from the same studio, but just the detail on the characters is definitely much better in this show. Like one thing I noticed is that the characters' hair flows in certain scenes. Like you'll notice when they're walking around, like when the characters like turn their head quickly, their hair will move after their head turns, kind of like what you would see in real life. And just that little attention to detail is something that I feel like I don't see in a lot of 2D animated shows, maybe in movies, but not in shows. So yeah, there's a lot of moments, like just still frames in this show that really left me impressed with the amount of detail and clear effort that went into the animation. So if I was to judge this show on the animation alone, I would definitely say it's really impressive to look at, if nothing else. It's eye candy. If that was the only good thing I can say about it, I would definitely say eye candy for sure. But it has other qualities too. Like I feel like I was kind of talking shit on a lot of the characters. The characters aren't bad. They're fine. They're just not particularly interesting. And I think that kind of works to the show's detriment. And something else too, like I kind of mentioned, like in the first Castlevania series, it really kicks off. It opens up very strong with us being introduced to Dracula and his wife and kind of the tragedy that surrounds them. There's kind of a moment like that with this show with Richter and his mom, where we're introduced to Alrox and his wrath against the Belmonts, but I don't know, it doesn't hit quite as hard as Dracula does. Another problem I have with the show is like the main villain, whose name I don't even remember because she's such a nothing villain. Like the Messiah vampire that they introduced, like she's just, number one, her design when she transforms looks kind of silly to me. I couldn't help but kind of laugh at it a little bit. And I don't know, nothing about her was particularly interesting. Dracula was interesting to me because he felt like a broken man. Like, yes, he's the strongest vampire. He's a leader of the vampires, but you also get a sense of his character. You feel sorry for him because of the tragedy that he goes through. And like, even though you don't necessarily agree with what he's doing when he wages war on the humans, you at least can kind of understand him. He's a tragic, relatable villain, kind of like Thanos in a sense. Maybe not quite to that extent, but that's kind of the feeling I was getting from him. The villain in this one, I don't even remember like really giving a shit about her. Like, she's okay, I guess. Drolta? Was that her name? No, Drolta was the henchman. I can't remember. Ezrabet? I think it was Ezrabet. I'm probably butchering that name. But yeah, like, I wasn't into her character at all. I didn't think she was that interesting. Maybe they'll develop her more in the second season, but I just didn't find her that compelling of a villain. And we don't even really, I don't remember when she's introduced, but I want to say it's around episode 4 or something like that. Maybe before that, I can't remember. But yeah, like, I mean, she's got an ominous presence to her, and when she's introduced, like properly, and we finally see her, like, see what she can do, she's definitely threatening. She's not that interesting. And again, compared to a character like Alrox, I didn't really find her that compelling, or her relationship to like Richter and his friends, like his adoptive family. I did like that they explored more of the humanity behind the night creatures. Like the character that shows up with Annette, what's his name? Edouard. He gets turned into a night creature. And I like how they incorporate like his ability to sing. as a night creature. Like, he retains a lot of his humanity and he befriends other night creatures. That was something that I felt like the original series kind of hints on a little bit. Like, there's the scene where Isaac's talking to that philosopher night creature, and that was one of my favorite scenes in the original show. I wanted more of that. Like, yeah, it's interesting to see these creatures from hell who still retain their humanity and kind of remember parts of their previous life. So I like that they kind of explored that a little bit more in this show. We don't get a whole lot of it, but it is there. And that stuff I thought was really good. But another thing I want to praise Nocturne on is the action sequences. The original series, Castlevania, had some badass fight scenes, and this one's no different. It's great seeing that Belmont whip come into play. We don't get to see the Morning Star in this, it's just the regular whip, but it is still really cool to see. So yeah, like the fight scenes in this are really cool. I especially like once Richter kind of gets his magic abilities and he goes just full Super Saiyan on the guys and starts fighting them. That part's really cool. And I like how his abilities are kind of a combination of like Trevor and Sypha from the original show. Like we see him using like ice abilities like what Sypha would use. I really like how he uses ice for like armor when he fights the vampires. That was really cool. So it's cool seeing like some of Sypha and Trevor's abilities being put into one character to fight with. I really like that. Yeah, I mean, overall, it's a good show. I really enjoyed it, and I would definitely recommend it for sure. And the nice thing, too, is even if you haven't seen the original series, this one operates pretty well as its own standalone story, so you can kind of come into this without too much knowledge of the prior show, and you'll be fine. It's referenced here and there, but it's not... damn, it's really coming down outside. I don't know if you can hear it. I got the noise gate on, but it's raining really crazy here. Well, I can't stop it, unfortunately. But anyways, yeah, like if you've never seen the original series, I think you'll do fine with this. Like, I don't recall if there was a recap or anything like that, like any kind of option for that in the beginning, but even so, like, I mean, I think it does a good enough job telling its own story and establishing these characters that I don't really think you really need to know too much about what came before. But I will definitely say I recommend going and watching the original show just because it's that damn good. But regardless, I think this stands fine on its own. Yeah, overall, I would definitely say I really enjoyed the show quite a bit. One thing I do want to say is it does have me pretty excited for season 2, and I think Netflix has pretty much confirmed there is going to be a second season, although I don't know if they've actually begun production yet, so if it is going to happen, probably not going to happen anytime soon. But it does set up pretty nicely for the second season with a pretty good cliffhanger. So just a heads up, if you have seen the original show, you'll know who I'm talking about. Alucard does show up in this. We don't get to see any of Sypha or Trevor, even in like a flashback, so those two regrettably are not in this show. Hopefully maybe we might see more of them in like a flashback in the second season, but Alucard does show up in this, and he is like probably one of my favorite characters from the original show. As soon as he started talking, I recognized his voice, and I was like, yep, that's Alucard. His entrance, while it does kind of come out of nowhere, and I do feel like they never even mentioned him prior to his entrance, at least not that I can remember, it is still an epic, badass moment in the show. Granted, he doesn't show up until the very end of the final episode, like I think literally like the last 30 seconds of the final episode, but it is badass. The way he stands there and looks at those, like he protects Richter and tells the other vampires, like, I am Alucard, and if you fight me, you will die, like thousands of vampires before. I was like, damn, that's ice cold. So yeah, he's awesome. And I love his little levitating sword that he has with him. Like that, just everything about Alucard is so cool. He kind of makes me think of D from Vampire Hunter D in a way. And his design is a little bit different in this show too. I didn't even notice that until he showed up. I guess because I was so used to the other characters. Because I went back and watched some of the older episodes of the original series, and like they kept Alucard's design mostly the same, but like his hair is much more white in this one. He has more of like a, I don't know what the word is, like an ethereal, almost angelic look to him in this one. I don't know if that was by design because he's supposed to be older or something, even though he looks basically the same. But yeah, like that was really cool. And it has me excited for season 2 because I really want to see what they're going to do with that. The idea of him training Richter to be like a vampire hunter, that could be cool. And I kind of wonder if maybe he has the Morning Star whip and maybe he'll give it to Richter. It would make sense since he was with Trevor when last we saw them in the original series. So, you know, maybe he kept it as some sort of like a keepsake. I don't know. I feel like it would make more sense for it to be in the Belmont family, but Richter doesn't have it, so I don't know what happened to it. So I'm kind of curious about that. Something else that I'd like to see too is maybe like more flashbacks, like maybe kind of giving us an update on like what Alucard's been doing all this time, like all these centuries. If we could get like one episode where it kind of shows his backstory and kind of like what's been going on behind the scenes with him, I think that'd be really cool. And also, too, just an excuse to see Sypha and Trevor again, because I love those two. That's like my favorite couple from the original show. Like, Trevor and Sypha are just like adorable together. I love them as a couple. So just any excuse to get those two characters back in this show, even if it's in a flashback, I'm all for it. So yeah, I mean, it's got me legitimately excited for season 2. So yeah, on the whole, my overall thoughts on Nocturne, it's a good, solid animation show. I think as a follow-up to the original show, it's not quite as good. I think the characters are a little weak. I think that maybe that could be something they could try to work on for season 2. Really try to develop these characters and give them more personality, give them more of a presence in the story. They're fine, but they just don't feel particularly interesting to me. When I can't even remember the names of half of them, that's not a good sign. So that's something to work on. The animation is stellar. The action fight sequences are great. I just think what they just need to do is just work on, developing the characters a bit more, and maybe just giving us more of a backstory with Alucard and kind of like what's been going on with him. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a pretty good start, and it has me genuinely excited for what's to come. So yeah, I think I would consider it a success. If I had to give an overall letter grade, I'd probably say like a solid B+. Really good. Not particularly great, but still, I think worth checking out. And even if you've never seen the original series, I still think this is worth at least watching, especially if you're a fan of Castlevania. I think there's definitely something here for you to enjoy. All right, everybody. Well, I think that's going to conclude this episode, a little bit longer than usual. Once again, I'm on Anchor, Spotify, and YouTube. If you like what you heard, please feel free to like, share, and subscribe, and I will catch you all next time. Later.